Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AnthroPuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Miles Jordan. He graduated from the University of Alaska Fairbanks with a Master of Fine Art in Photography and is currently pursuing a PhD in Anthropology from Louisiana State University, while also working as a graduate teaching assistant and photographer. Prior to his current degree, Miles has been an active photographer for the past 8 years, first as a photojournalist and then a fine artist. His work has been showcased nationally. How are you doing today, Miles?
Doing pretty good.
So, what is it that you currently do, and how is it important or related to anthropology?
Yeah, so I'm pursuing a PhD in anthropology currently at LSU. I'm in the current process of doing IRB approval and also just getting started on really like the introduction of my dissertation. I'll start fieldwork pretty soon, but what I'm proposing to do is to do an intergenerational ethnography on musicians or on music, on the music scene in New Orleans, post-Katrina in particular. So it's been 20 years as of 6 weeks ago. I was 7 years old when Katrina hit. So this is sort of multifaceted for me, right? I'm an insider in a lot of ways to this research. My father's a musician. He's been a musician for 30 years. I'm born and raised in New Orleans. You know, my whole upbringing and my whole entire generation, our reality is this post-Katrina thing, right? In the same way that you and I are born in the generation where social media begins, right? Or like significant social media, Instagram, Twitter, like all this type of stuff. And so there's no way of separating that life from one another for us. Like with the Katrina children, we were so young. There's no way of, I don't totally remember New Orleans beforehand. In the same way that I don't know what it's actually like to be a musician, right? I've gotten to watch my father. I've gotten to help him. I've been on tours with him. You know, I photograph musicians, so I'm in the scene in that regard. But in no ways could I ever claim to be a musician, right? I don't play music. I don't play any instruments. I mean, I've sung backup on a couple songs and I'm published in that way, but please, I'm no musician, right? So to me, it's kind of like a tripartite thing. On the one hand, I'm excited to learn about my city through understanding it from people who are older than me, because I want to look at my generation of musicians. So the people who are like our age and who have become professional musicians, particularly the ones from here. My father's generation, he's 53, and then 53 and up. So that generation, he's been a musician 30 years. And then I probably will dabble some in that middle area of like the people who came as like so-called transplants. Because like if you moved to New Orleans in 2008, but you've been playing music since, well, you understand that post-Katrina scene maybe more than anybody in some ways, because that's what you're native to. But so I say all that to say, it's fun to learn about New Orleans. It's fun to learn about music through people that are not just my dad, but it's also fun. This is the third of this tripartite thing. It's to learn like about him through his life, right? Like, let's go talk to people. Let's go figure out what this lifestyle really means.
So based on what your dad did that kind of lead you into the fine arts, into anthropology?
Yeah, so I think yes and no. Basically, so I had never taken an anthropology class in my life. I had taken one class in undergrad where we had 4 different professors, and 1/4 of that semester, we had 4 weeks of an anthropologist. So I'd gotten that. But so I got my Master of Fine Arts, which is the terminal master's degree for fine art in photography from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And what I did there, and this is a big reason why I think I ended up in the anthropology field, is I did a cross-cultural comparison. I did a mundane cross-cultural comparison of interior Alaska and southern Louisiana. And so when I was presenting about that work, the way I spin that narrative is, especially at the time, I wanted to try to mix my father's career and my grandfather's career. So my grandfather was a professor for 40, 50 years. He was a political science professor. And my father has been a musician his whole entire life. So my thought was, well, I've found this love and passion for photography, and why don't I try to be a professor and do it that way and get this degree that will help me do that, right? So that was my original thought. And so then I had some interviews, almost got a couple jobs, didn't, but got into LSU. They liked the idea that I came in with. They were cool with having my MFA be representative of a master's degree. So I had half the amount of credit hours I had to take. thankfully. So now I really have that opportunity of sort of marrying these two interests. And then to throw my mom in here, to be fair to her, she's the photographer. So growing up, she's a hobbyist like that. I hate using that term, but I haven't figured out what a better term is. She's a really good photographer who loves photography and cameras. And so she put me around cameras when I was really young, right? Like the oldest photo that I had that I could link or find that for certain was mine, I was like 9, 8 or 9. And it was fascinating to look at it because it was like, wow, this looks like how I would take stuff now. And so it was a bit of a funny thing there. I guess today's all about threes because first was tripartite, now it's my mom, dad, and grandpa.
Now, why New Orleans? Like, you could have your pick of anywhere in the world to research or study, and why your hometown? Why is it important to study your hometown?
Oh man. I mean, I think in a general sense, it's important to study your hometown just to, on even the most basic level, just have some level of understanding of the cultural context, the historic context of where you are, right? Like one of the most fascinating things about doing readings about New Orleans is we have some of these same conversations over and over again. And I can kind of come to some people now and be like, well, I get that the roads are bad and we have problems with flooding, but we've had that problem for 300 years. Like, we're not fixing that problem just because it's in modern times now. It's still going to be a problem. So I think on that hand, it's really important for me. So I'm my dad moved to New Orleans when he, or not in New Orleans. He actually grew up in Mandeville, which is a suburb outside of New Orleans across Lake Pontchartrain, which is Lake Pontchartrain is not actually a lake. Lake Pontchartrain is the estuary to the Gulf of Mexico. So actually the Gulf just basically comes all the way up to New Orleans. And so in many ways, I'm a first generation New Orleanian, right? My parents aren't from here. I am. I've grown up in the same neighborhood my whole entire life. I'm from the Carrollton neighborhood of New Orleans. If anybody listens to this and is from New Orleans, they'll know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, it really is totally unimportant. But I've lived here my whole life. In New Orleans, a major question that you get asked, the first question you'll get asked a lot of times, where'd you go to school? And when they say school, they mean high school. They don't care when you went to college. There's these like cultural nuances of like, you got to be able to answer for some of these things. And if you don't know how to, like New Orleans can be really prejudiced about putting people on the outside, which I think is a little ridiculous. But it happened a lot, especially post-Katrina. But that's because of like neighborhood and gentrification shifts. So it's like it's reasonable on one hand, it's kind of unreasonable on the other hand. I like oscillate between both sides, I guess. But for me, I wanted to study New Orleans, and I just love New Orleans. I don't think, I've been to 46 states. I've gone to a couple. I think I've been like 8 countries, and by no means have I been everywhere. So, but there's very few places that I've ever been that remind me of New Orleans. I think it's also just a lot of very individual circumstances that have created this situation culturally, economically, and even like Hurricane Katrina. There's a great book by scholar Andy Horowitz called Katrina 1915 to 2015. And his whole thesis basically is that it's a man made issue as much as it is a natural disaster. Yes, a hurricane hit New Orleans. That's not why New Orleans went underwater, right? And so for me, I think the reason I wanted to study New Orleans so much is just, I don't know where else I would study. I think that's like going to Alaska and doing that comparison was like I guess the bravest thing in some ways I had done. But I think even here, as much as I'm an insider, I'm so much of an outsider in so many ways, right? I'm a first generation New Orleanian. Frankly, like New Orleans, like Mayor Ray Nagin said, it's a chocolate city. It's a predominantly Black city. Most of my like lived experience, I went to public school my whole life. So most of my lived experience is like in close proximity to Black people and Blackness in general. So even with that, I'm an outsider to a bunch of those things. So if I can like make the relationships and learn more and kind of be able to give back culturally in any way to New Orleans, I mean, it would mean more to me than it would to the city. I'll just put it like that. I mean, it's gonna fulfill my heart probably much more than it would New Orleans. But
Do you feel like the familiarity can be a strength in your anthropology research, or is there kind of a risk for bias?
well, I do think in a lot of cases there would be a risk for bias, right? And I do think this is something I'm going to have to answer for, in particular with like IRB. However, I would say with this, my question is, I just want to know what changed,
Mm.
right? I want to see what changed spatially. I want to see what changed geographically. Where do people play? How is the scene different? I don't know, and I could be wrong about this. So pushback in some ways would be awesome, but I don't even know what the bias I would form here is. I know it changed just by virtue of the whole city change post Katrina. Now, change is relative though. Maybe we go through this whole entire process and the reality is it barely changed, right? Maybe it changed completely and now it's like not even the same thing it was. I don't think that's the answer, for the record. So I do think, yes, I do think there is genuine risk. I think the bigger risk for me will be being too reliant upon musicians I already know. Like, I need to make sure that I get into musicians who I do not know and I've never had a relationship with, because as valuable as it is to be able to talk to these people who have known me since I was a child, and it's great that there's comfort within it, right? Because most of them don't really know me as an adult. I moved away from New Orleans for like 8 years, so most of them haven't seen me since I was like a teenager. So me coming and being like, "Hey, can I interview you? I'm in this PhD program." They're like, "What the?" They're like, "When did he become an adult?" But I want to make sure I get outside of that because I know that there's major pockets of New Orleans music and major pockets of the New Orleans music scene and the New Orleans music scene's history that if I don't get outside of my comfort zone, I'm fearful I'll miss.
I feel for you definitely like, having to maybe go check out some of the music joints and being like, hey, who are some people who played here prior to Katrina? Or do you know like a musician I could talk to who then know? So it's like all about these word of mouth connections that you can make, but it's like taking that step to like reaching out to these people I know can be the hardest.
No, definitely. And I mean, there's some major New Orleans music families. There's a couple names that are like kind of New Orleans music royalty. And I don't necessarily have connections with all of them. And so it's like, okay, who do I know that knows them, that has a good enough relationship with them that we can just all get together? Let's just sit down first. I don't need to come interview y'all right away. Let's talk. You can vet me out, see if you like me or not. But, sit down with them because ironically, I too am pretty introverted. And in a lot of ways, that's why I'm a photographer, right? You're behind something. You literally have a space that removes you from it, right? And I will say, because I didn't say this already, that's another portion of why I'm very excited to do this work. And I was very excited I only applied to one PhD program and I literally only applied to LSU. I applied to one. Part of the reason I was excited to even try to apply to an anthropology program is because there's a history of visual methods and being able to use visual as data, but also just visual as like an enhancement to research. And I think part of my big thing with all of this, and I didn't know this before I started the program, but I've started to learn it as I've done a lot of the reading. A lot of the post-Katrina research is like neoliberal governmental critique, which is incredibly valid and necessary. But it backgrounds people. Even in ethnographic research, it backgrounds people, which is kind of weird to me and doesn't really make any sense in my brain. But I'll have to figure that one out more in time. But part of the reason I want to be able to use the visual methods that I have become talented at, whether photographically, but also video, is long-term, let's be able to use these people's actual voices, right? And as anthropology, both in general as a discipline, but then also like a lot of the journals, as they're taking the multimodality turn, like, okay, if you guys are going to want to use stuff other than written text, great. Like, I will gladly create some stuff, which was exciting for me because at first the thought process but just having to write, because it did feel like just in a bad way. Like it felt like it was a pejorative in my head. Like the idea of just having to write and read was like very stressful to me. But part of the reason I was interested in doing a PhD in general is I finished my MFA and I was like, well, I'm kind of unsatisfied academically. Like I left it and I was like, what? Like I was like, okay, great. I became a better photographer. I kind of feel like I didn't learn a lot. Right. And so I was like, I want to learn. I want to go back to learning and like push myself and try to be uncomfortable. And so here I am.
Do you feel that by using photography or videography, it kind of enhances the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words?
Yeah, no, totally. I also just think, again, it can be as simple as let the person speak, right? Let's say one day some of this research can be put in like a gallery, right? As opposed to just like a traditional online paper or something. Well, if we put it in a gallery setting, well, why can't we put up the videos of the people that I talk to, take out the questions, right? Remove my voice, but just let them talk and like cut down these edits to where it's, however many minutes of these people talking, but then it's like they exist. And in perpetuity, they exist. They get to speak for what New Orleans means to them, right? As much as I get to too in the written aspect, they get to do it, right? Because I don't, that's kind of one of my issues with anthros sometimes. I don't want to speak for other people, right? I don't have that ability, but you can inform me and help me learn. And if I can use these visual methods as ways of then both in the research and after the research, like really amplify the individual voices, that's what I would prefer to do, right? Like they ask you in IRB stuff, like, how are you going to mitigate, or how are you going to pay for, or X, Y, Z, like those type of things. How are you going to, if someone does an interview for you, what is your thing, right? A lot of the time they're like, don't do money, which obviously I don't, if you're a grad student too, I don't have any money. So I'm like, look, man, like musicians, guys, you have social capital. I have videos and photos. Use them. Don't pay for them. Just go use them. I don't care. Whatever you do with them, do it. Now if you print like a shirt or something like that has a photo of mine, well, let me get the shirt. Or if you get some stickers or something, but that can be negotiated, right? Like in general, though, that's like the thing that I'm trying to offer these people, because like, look, I have this skill. I bought all this equipment. I've spent all this time. Toured with my dad for like a decade. So I've been photographing almost that whole entire time too. So countless music photos. Too many. So here. And thank you for cooperating and being great and letting me ask a bunch of questions, and God bless you, right? Like that's how I feel.
And I feel like by including the options of like photography or videography into research, I think it makes it a lot more accessible for individuals to access, because with the way the education system is going right now, there is a higher level of illiteracy than there was years ago. So having that form of media to provide them another option into learning new things, I think is something that should be incorporated into a lot of research, because nobody wants to sit there. I mean, some people do, but most people don't want to sit there and read a 200-page paper with a bunch of academic jargon in it. I honestly would rather watch videos or look at pictures.
Totally.
Personal preference. But with that being said, do you feel that individuals who are going into anthropology should also maybe take some class in the fine arts just to kind of broaden their skill set so that they're not only reliant on writing papers?
Yeah, I think it could be helpful at the very least. I mean, I think there's a couple ways you could go about it. Like, obviously, like I'm going to be very photo forward, but I've seen incredible ethnography and incredible work done where people will draw or they'll paint, or like there's some research been done for decades in New Orleans on the New Orleans Jazz Fest. And one of the methods that they did is they had everyone, all the people that all their interlocutors, they had them draw the map of Jazz Fest their way. So just you tell me what the signifiers are. And it's fascinating because, some people can be like, this is this stage, this is that, but it's all these other things, right? But similarly, I feel like there's a lot of turn within Anthro on like the graphic side. If you could make graphic visualizations of your work, and I don't mean visualizations in the typical sense like a graph, but if you could make something like, have you ever read the graphic novel Mouse?
Mm-mm.
About the Holocaust? Okay, well, there's a graphic novel. I can't remember the guy's name. I literally said the wrong guy's name in class the other day, so I'm not going to even try again because I think I'm going to get it wrong. But, it's there's a bunch of signifiers in there in terms of why things are drawn the way they are. But if you could do something like that and you can express your research or what you find in that way, I think it's really cool. Like, I don't necessarily think you have to do it, but I think it would help. I think in a lot of ways it would help too for a lot of just academic people in general, because art, you get a lot more feedback. So you get a lot more criticism, which is good sometimes, just at the very least of getting criticism and having to be like, wow, that hurt my feelings, but okay, move on. I feel like sometimes we kind of get, it's like, oh man, you wrote like, how many pages of this paper is horrible,
Yeah, I think, see, I could never get into any kind of art because I'm just not a creative person at all. My brain is wired for math and science. Well, barely science, but mainly math. But I feel like by taking an art class, I think it probably would have helped me develop a little bit more in my skill sets. Because I took like art history or art appreciation, and I was kind of just a class to get through. And I'm like, no skills here, just looking at art. But I think taking an actual art class, because, a lot of individuals, you have to know how to do like cover pages, or maybe you're going to make a website, or you're going to make flyers for a talk you're having. And if you don't have any creative background like me, that stuff's really, really difficult, and you have to find someone else to do it. So definitely, I think that's a skill that people should obtain, or even if you suck at art like I do, at least it's something you can like practice on instead of saying like, no, this is something I'll never be good at. I'm just not going to develop that skill set at all.
No, I will say in particular, because you mentioned the math brain, I think anyone who considers himself to have a math brain, photography and music is your friend. A lot of photography and music is just is math, right? And photography is more straightforward of explaining that. All of these numbers mean something. They interrelate with one another. Like that's how the settings work, right? I'm not going to get super deep into the exposure triangle, but there's a triangle, right, of 3 different types of settings that you just have to interact with each other. And once you understand how the numbers work, it's really quite simple. I'm not gonna lie. I know, the guy who's showcased places is gonna say it's easy. It is easy. Like it's not that hard. Now music's a little bit harder, but all of that's math, right? Any type of chords, all that kind of stuff, it's all math. Truthfully, it's interesting. I do think what you said though about the flyers and the website, you're so right. If I see another Canva flyer, I'm going to lose my mind because they all look like Canva. It's like when people make AI flyers, I'm like, guys, it looks like AI. Like, I don't hate it. Good job, I guess, but
Yeah, it's a good jumping off point, but sometimes it's so obvious that you're just like, I saw that on Canva before, like when I was scrolling through my whatever. I had a professor, it was for a technical writing class. She's like, oh, when you make your cover for your report or whatever, you can't use any templates, no Canva, no Word templates. You got to create it from scratch. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm screwed. There's no way I'm going to be able to come up with something from scratch. So I did use Canva as like a jumping point of like, oh, what are some elements I could use and throw in here and it'll be fine. But yeah, things are getting too easy that we're just not using our brains anymore to try and figure it out. And I just get that.
At least just get Canva Premium. Just unlock more assets, please. That's really all I'm asking for. If you want to take the easy way, fine. Like, okay. I mean, honestly, this is like a totally philosophically different conversation, what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'd feel the same way with AI. I think there's reasonable usage, right? But let's keep using our brain, guys. Wait a minute. I'm more concerned for everyone younger than us. Like undergrads.
If I was to go back to school now, which I started to go back to school and then I was taking classes, I'm like, why does this feel so much harder than it was 5 years ago? And it's because I'm like, I don't really want to use my brain. I could just, like, you want me to come up with a topic? Can I just plug that into ChatGPT and then pick one from there and then write? And so it's definitely making us dumber and more lazy. So,
but I mean, okay, in some ways, though, what you just said isn't necessarily the worst application of GPT, as opposed to being like, I'm going to write this whole paper with GPT.
Yeah, people do that. Yeah, I have a friend who's she's an English high school teacher, and she's just like, it's so bad. I have to make them write their papers during class with pen and paper, not using their phones or a computer. Otherwise, it's just all AI. And I'm like, yikes. Because I mean, who's got time for it anymore? You're working, or you got jobs, or you're playing extracurriculars. Like, I don't have time to do 6 hours of homework when I get home from school. Like,
a lot of people may get mad about what I'm about to say, and that's okay. I 100% used GPT as a source of finding more material, like reading wise. Like, hey, I'm in this program. I'm doing this research. I'm looking for these types of books. Like, what is out there? As opposed to being like, I'm going to go through JSTOR for the next 8 hours, find 8 million articles, and like 12 of them will be what I'm looking for, right? It's like, okay, let's cut out this bit a little bit, right? Now we need to figure out the water resource part and some of those things.
Pretty bad. Yeah.
And Louisiana is actually ground A of one of those things. They're building a meta center that's going to use 3 times the electricity of New Orleans.
That's nuts.
I don't think it's going to go well.
At least learn how to use like hydropower or salt water or something, not fresh.
Steal the way apparently China's AI uses significantly less water. Just collaborate with the world again? I don't know.
Right. Share with the class?
Yeah, please.
Now, for someone who has gone through grad school and is now continuing into a PhD program, do you have any advice for like prospective students or anybody who wants to get into anthropology that way?
I think their single biggest friend, no matter what you're doing grad school wise, you have to find people that want to support you. You have to find people for your individual committee, because you will have to build a committee no matter what master's or PhD you do. You have to find people that want to support you. And I know the first thought is going to be like, don't you want people to push you first? I would argue you want support first. You don't know when professors are going to go on sabbatical. You don't know what could occur at any given time. You don't know when it's going to just be really difficult for you in your own individual life. If you have people in your corner that are saying, look, I am going to help you, you are going to get this done, you know, boom, like that you need. And this is coming from somebody, I'm not really like a big procrastinator, right? If you give me a deadline, I'm going to do it. If it's bad, it's bad, but I'm going to do it, right? With anything. And so, for me, I think it's support. I've gotten this interesting experience of my thesis advisor for my PhD and my MFA advisor. Like, I will be one of, if not both of their last students, right? They're both about to retire. And I'm not saying look for people that are going to retire. That's incredibly bad advice. However, there is something to be said of you want people who are going to support you. And in my experience, at the very least, people who are longer term faculty, I think, feel much more willingness just to be like, yeah, I'm going to help in whatever way you need. Right. Like I'm applied for stuff and put my advisor down and she'll just do it because she's awesome. So because some you'll have to send emails and be like, hey, I applied for these 5 things. Can you do it? And then they're going to do it 6 weeks later. And it's like, no, she just did it that day. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, my husband had his advisor for his master's was more in I'm going, if you need me, I'm here, but do this on your own. You got this. And it got to the point where she had to do a lot of the equations for his because he was researching how this very simplified version is how to use moon dust to make materials so that we're not having to haul it to the moon and all that kind of stuff for space travel. He's a mechanical engineer, but he was supposed to do all the calculations because it was way beyond his scope of ability. And he put it off so long, he had to do another semester of grad school.
Oh, no. I'd lose my mind.
Oh, I was losing it for him. So I'm just like, are you emailing her every day? And he's like, yes, she's not responding.
He's like, I've done what I need to do. You're mad. He's mad. Everybody's mad.
Yeah, so I think that's great advice, finding someone who's willing to support you and do whatever you need them to do, immediately. Because I feel like I've had multiple friends who were in their master's program, and they're like, my professor didn't give 2 craps about me. So, if I needed something done, it was like pulling teeth. And I'm like, that sounds awful and stressful.
No. I would say support and an understanding. That would be my second one. We had graduate seminars even in the fine arts, and so I took the photography graduate seminar every semester. Even though you didn't have to, you only needed a couple. But I was like, why would I not? It was the best class I've ever been in. My professor's single goal was to spend 1 day of class not talking anything about photography, just somehow, not purposefully, he wasn't going to set a list, but just somehow an accident, go the whole time and not do anything photo-wise. But basically, he had this understanding with me he was like, yo, Miles is going to shoot a ton. He's going to take thousands of photos, whether digital or film. And I was shooting a lot of film at the beginning. I was shooting a lot of 35 millimeter film. And I would process all my own stuff. I'd buy my own chemicals. I'd do everything myself. It's a lot more time consuming now, right? You have to make your chemicals. Then you have to develop everything. And everything's got to dry. Then you got to scan it all. Then after you scan it, you got to flip it from a negative to a positive. And after you flip it from a negative to a positive, you have to edit it. And then you got to do something with the edit. And no, it's a really long process. It's way cheaper than having it sent out and doing it, but it takes longer. But he had this understanding. He was like, if Miles doesn't show up to class with photos for a month, that's fine. He's like, he's going to come eventually at that 6-week mark and be like, yeah, here's 400 photos. And everyone's going to be like, okay. I mean, probably wasn't that many, but it was a lot. Basically, without getting go super, super deep in my MFA thesis, I picked 3 elements to culturally compare. So things you'd see on a walk, people, and then what I called house portraits or building portraits. And so what that means is the full roof is in there. It's not cut off. It's the full face facade. But originally it was 8 or 9 different things. I mean, it was all over the place. I mean, it's the same thing I feel now, right? It's I'm going to have to hone this thing in, but just start out here, Yeah. Don't go this narrow, because then if they say no, now you're scrambling. If you're out here and you're like, oh, really? No. I think one of the greatest pieces of advice I've gotten from an anthropologist is that sometimes, and I don't think she really meant sometimes. I think she meant basically every time. But your research is going to show you what the answer is. You're probably not going to have the answer. What you think is the thing, the research is probably going to show something else. Because you don't know. And especially if you're an outsider to somewhere, you really don't.
I think that's the cool thing about anthropology is with an anthropology degree and any research that you're doing, sometimes you're not looking for a specific answer. You're like, I'm just curious to see what pops up And then it takes you down whole different avenues that you're like, I didn't even consider this. And it's just like, how cool is that? But
That's like people keep getting tripped up with me when they're like, "So what's your question?" And I'm like, "Well, I just want to see what changed." And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Let's just see." Like, I don't know, dude. Like, that's my point. No one else has done the research yet. It's my time. I don't know. It'll show itself. I mean, even already but I've already done some interviews, right? I've already done some because I was like, let's just see what it's like. I was also in a class where like I could use it for the class. But even in some of those interviews, like there's stuff I've learned already that's like, like let's put that in my back pocket, like to consider to keep considerate, right? Like one of the answers I got about what changed is, and I'll use my dad as an example. My dad, when I was a kid, played in a funk band called New Orleans Juice. But then now, so he played in that band till he was the singer songwriter. He was a lead bassist though, which is like not really a traditional thing. But then afterwards, now he's more of like an Americana, folk, roots rock, country to a degree kind of band. But it's called Dave Jordan and the NIA. The NIA being the Neighborhood Improvement Association. But if you think about the names of those two bands, totally different. Even if you think about Juice versus NIA, right? Let's just think about like just remove those. Look at the beginning. New Orleans Juice, Dave Jordan, and it goes from this like very collective, and this is something that a lot of people say about New Orleans music. It's like one big city band, right? Anybody can kind of play with anybody when somebody needs somebody. Because if you're trusted enough, everyone's like, okay, like, because this is one of the few places, at least in the country, but maybe in the world. I'm not familiar enough, but I can say in the country where you can reasonably live as a gig economist, whether a musician, a photographer. I mean, that's part of the beauty of New Orleans, right? Is you have this sort of underbelly that allows people to live outside of tradition, right? We don't have anything to offer anyway. So if you wanted to go work for industry, it's not there unless you want to work oil and gas, health science, service. You could teach. Actually, most of those you're not going to make any money, unfortunately. I mean, health science will, but that's our reality, right? That's New Orleans reality. Like a lot of times they'll say, and I don't love these terms, right? I don't love third world, first world. I think all of that's way too. If you're going to like designate a whole place as third world, but then you're going to have massive poverty within your city that's like similar, they're like, how different are you than them, really? Like it sort of just seems like, oh, it's just bad. But people will say that about New Orleans. They'll be like, it feels more like the third world, right? A lot of people will say it's more the most northern Caribbean city than it is a southern American city, southern, like south of the United States, not South America. I'll just leave it at this, right? Like after the Haitian Revolution, where do those French people go? A lot of them go to New Orleans, straight up. And so they bring, same thing with Cuba. When they leave Cuba or they're interacting, like, I don't know if you're familiar with like transculturation and that whole idea. Well, that's like only in the Cuban context, but I mean, it's really easy for me to at least see how it's totally applicable to New Orleans. It's totally applicable to these other places. And like New Orleans wouldn't exist how it does. Like, jazz music as a thing wouldn't exist in this place if it wasn't for all these different, people call it a gumbo, but it is. You get all these different things at one spot and something authentic blooms, right? Now, the streets have potholes. We got a lot of crime and there's problems.
well, please.
But culturally, it's what. Right, exactly. That's why I even like hesitate to even make the criticisms because I'm like, most places, the crime thing, we have a murder problem, straight up. We do. Like, we did. Most of my life, we've been one of, if not the murder capital of the United States. So we straight up that's our issue, which is a bad issue. But, and this is said in the research, you could talk to me and my friends. You could even just go talk to a guy on a stoop. If you were walking around New Orleans right now, we'll all have the same answer. The truth of that, though, is if you are not in those communities, if you're not in those situations, you're not in those situations. New Orleans isn't really a place like that terrorist attack that happened at the beginning of the year was so kind of random because we don't really do, like as weird as that sounds, to be the murder capital of the place, we don't do mass shootings. We don't do mass terror. It's more like blocks have beef with other blocks. And so that stuff gets handled in a negative way, right? If they had more resources and allocation of resource and access and all these other things, it wouldn't be like that, as we all know. But sometimes I think the criticisms of New Orleans become too big. And I'm like, guys, you don't have the context, right? Like, you're not wrong. Our murder rate is too high. It's not too high for the reasons you think, if I'm being totally transparent.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, 'cause so I work for the district attorney's office here in Colorado Springs, and there's some days, there's so many cases that I'm just like, "Can y'all just stop committing crime just for one day?" I can't even imagine what the DA's office is going through in New Orleans, but
I mean, we had 9 people escape from the jail. One of them was on the road for like 4 months. We just got him like 3 days ago as of like mid-October. And the last one to get re-arrested, he was the most dangerous one, at least by what he was charged for. I've had this thought a bunch because I took some history of anthropology courses last semester. My first semester, 2 semesters ago. And what was so interesting is, so much of the anthro criticism, right, is social Darwinism and bias and all these other things. And what was so fun for me, maybe this was originally so I went to LSU for 2 years in undergrad. I actually studied African and African American studies for 2 years. Then I transferred. I got a communication degree because I thought it would be easy. It was. And because I could photograph with it, it was just great. And I really credit LSU's AAAS department, the African and African American Studies. But by the time I got to anthropology, like so much of the criticisms and so much of what they were trying to teach people to think like, I was like, oh yeah, I've been told this. I'm sitting there like, oh yeah, I thought that was how we were supposed to think. I'm the type of person when I travel, I'll intentionally not learn anything about the place. Like when I moved to Fairbanks, Alaska, I didn't know anything on purpose. Like people tried to show me stuff I didn't want to know. Like I genuinely, I wanted to go in completely blind and just be like, what is this? And in general, that's my situation most places. I'm like, let's just see. Like, I don't know. It'll be fun regardless. I have this interesting thing, like, I'm not a big person, right? I'm 5'8", 150. Like I'm like the least scary kind of cis hetero white guy that could be. Like most people, like if you have an issue with me photographing something, most people on the street could beat me up, right? Most people could. And so I think that there's a little bit of like this understanding of like, okay, this guy's not as much of a threat. Right. It's also the same argument I make for why having a public camera is actually better for consent making than having a phone is. Because when you have a camera, it's a signifier immediately. If we're walking down the street, you see it and you're like, oh, okay. Right. Like when people get upset with me, because it happens occasionally, like when I'm walking around and photographing, when people get upset, like I always think I'm like, guys, I'm really doing you a favor. If you don't want to be photographed, just walk away. Like I won't force you to be photographed. Like there's no point.
now, do you feel that by going into getting an anthropology degree, it has already broadened your perspective more on how you view the world?
Totally. I think it's also just helped me understand my own process in creation in a lot of ways. I had a buddy who taught me about the term ethnography. So I have a buddy, his name is Nick Albert. He was the only guy from our graduating class in New Orleans, only person from the whole entire city of New Orleans to get into Harvard, our graduating year. So he went to Harvard, he got an honors degree or whatever in social studies or social science or one of those things. It was like something particular. I don't remember what it was. But he wrote an honors thesis that was an ethnography about gentrification in New Orleans. But it was an interesting way of looking at gentrification. One side was like traditional gentrification, and one side was like the other side of gentrification. Like when you change a whole neighborhood, like for example, if a neighborhood has Section 8 and you move the Section 8 out, where does Section 8 go? And how do you change neighborhoods by then moving these things to new places, right? Because the neighborhood that he was from in New Orleans used to be middle class, and now is like considered like if you talk to New Orleanians, we all kind of have the same. It's New Orleans East, and we all kind of have the same opinion. We're all like, don't go to the East. But at the same time, it's like these people's homes, man. Like in total fairness to them, like we all say it in jest. Like I would love for the East for them to develop the East in any way, but they don't. But so Nick told me about ethnography many years ago because I was doing this photo series called the Yellow Chair series, where I seated my friends in the same yellow chair in the backyard of my house at the time. And we were talking about mostly gender at the time, but it was in the middle of COVID. Part of the ways that we could all come together was to be in a backyard outside space because you could social distance. You weren't in one roof, we could be far enough away. Like we just thought that was something you could do. And I was talking to Nick about it one day and he was like, whoa, he's like, in some ways, he's like, it sounds like you're making an ethnography. I was like, what is an ethnography? And so that kind of got the ball rolling. And in a lot of ways, that's been beautiful because like the Yellow Chair series has now morphed kind of into a different thing because I've gotten into anthropology and I've learned more about what these things really mean and how you actually do them. And it's like made me rethink like, oh, like with these same friends, it probably won't be all of the same friends. But I fully intend, because we've done some new photos 5 years later. We did some in 2020. I've done some more in 2025. I intend to keep doing that. Right. And now I've gone to people's places as opposed to them coming to mine. Same chair though. And so what if we did this for 25 years and we looked at like a whole generation of this one friend group, how we all change, and what does that speak to about like the city of New Orleans? Because we're all from here, is where we all met. And the thing with New Orleans is it's the fastest shrinking metropolitan area in the United States. I believe in the last couple of years, we've lost like 2% of our population. I mean, if you look at even after Katrina, and obviously we're quite a bit away, but in like the 2010 census, New Orleans lost over 100,000 people after Katrina. And so, and like I told you, I wasn't joking when I say we don't have industry, right? There's like an existential crisis that everyone kind of knows is occurring in Louisiana, but we're all just sort of like, well, no one's doing anything about it. So, like I've grown up in the backdrop of Katrina, but I've also grown up in the backdrop of BP oil spill and having to walk to school and be able to smell oil being burnt down the river. I've had to deal with the whole idea of we've basically just allowed for industry to be more important than sustaining a landmass. And so here we are. We've put all of our resources into natural resource, maritime, these types of things, and we didn't negotiate the way somewhere like Alaska did, where people get a dividend and all those things. Now, granted, that's a whole other can of worms. But so here we are, right? And I feel like all of South Louisiana is just waiting for another big hurricane. And we all know we don't have resources. We all know we don't have these things. But then we're culturally, that hasn't changed, or not so much that it's gone, and you can't replicate the culture anywhere else. So then you have this weird reality of everyone's like, what is happening, right? But you're going to keep being in the culture, because if that's the one thing that will sustain and the one thing that's causing like beauty and happiness and togetherness for everybody, then that's what we're going to do. But long term, it's frightening, especially for my generation and afterwards, because I can understand the people who are 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. You've had roots here, whole family's been married, owned houses, raised your kids. I get it. That's really hard to leave. But when you're 21 and you could change your life, go somewhere else and maybe have more, I think a lot of people are like, why would I not? So here we are.
I've been to New Orleans once, and it wasn't during Mardi Gras. I don't know when it was, but there was a bunch of parades, and I thought it was really cool to see all these block parties going on. And there's definitely a sense of community down in New Orleans, which I think is really cool. And I think a lot of kind of more isolated cities have that. And I definitely think it makes it easier for culture to expand and build in those type of communities, because everybody's talking to everybody. Everybody's passing on language, songs, writings, or whatever. And it's not like if you're in, I don't know, like Pensacola, Florida, where nobody talks to anybody, then it's just like there's nothing going on there. So I think it's cool that we still have these kind of cultural hubs throughout the United States.
What would be more interesting to find is like, where are the weird random pockets of so for example, where I went to undergrad, we had a significant student population from Nepal. So significant, in fact, that they had their own student government. But so a lot of them afterwards, if they went and got a graduate degree, a lot of them go to the University of Nebraska. And so it's like, why is there this connectivity between Nepal and Monroe, and then Monroe to Nebraska? Like, what? I think every place has something, right? But even in like a place like Colorado, like even if you went outside of the big cities, right? Like I think it would be fascinating to talk to like some of the long-term people who live in like Telluride. As Telluride gone from like, yeah, still a mountain town and expensive, but now to like, it's more like Vail and everything. Yeah. It'd be fascinating to talk to people who've been there and be like, dude, what in the world? Because they got to be like, yeah, I don't know. Like that would be fun to talk about, even when it's not like a different culture coming in. Now it's making me think though, like, and someone's had to have written this before, or like, I guess maybe the whole idea of like culture of commodification or stuff like that. But it's interesting to think about a place like Telluride, and you get now like swapped into this like Vail, or like you think about a place like Austin and you get this tech boom, or like these things. It's like, what is the culture in that regard of capitalism, right? Because you're coming in here and changing these spaces more toward a culture of that thing. But what is that thing, right? Like that's harder to define, but I think it's apparent because all these places, like once the tech boom dies, they're like, yeah, I don't know. If they didn't prepare for it, they're like left behind. Yeah. And so it's like, wait, like I think about somewhere like Seattle, right? They tore down all kind of stuff to, eminent domain, all these things to do the major tech boom. And it's like, okay, great. But you just totally like wrecked an area. And then eventually these people move, and it's like, what happens to that area? And using New Orleans, right? After Katrina, we had either the oldest or the second oldest public hospital in the United States called Charity Hospital. And so Charity Hospital is this old Art Deco building that really 100% could have been reopened after Katrina. Like, it did not have structural problems. I mean, there was some stuff that had just deferred maintenance that it needed, and then part of it got flooded. So there was work that needed to be done. Let me be clear. But they made a governmental decision to not reopen Charity Hospital, and they built a new hospital called University Medical Center, UMC. But they eminent domained like half of Mid-City, which is a neighborhood in New Orleans. And they tore everything down to build this hospital. Maybe not half, but they tore down, I think it was like either, I don't remember the exact. My brain is telling me it's somewhere between 6 and 12 city blocks, which is a lot. Like that. Think about how many people live on those blocks. Think about how much history, I mean, let alone culture, but you remove these things and now what? And what's weird in the New Orleans context is the Charity Hospital building's still there. They didn't tear it down. It's just there. Tulane University bought it, and they're going to turn it into like partly apartments, partly stuff for like Tulane nursing, do like a work hospital kind of thing. I don't know. Which is good. I mean, better than it just being vacant.
Well, before we get to the last 4 questions of the interview, is there anything we haven't talked about in regards to fine arts, anthropology, that you wanted to inform the listeners about?
I don't think so. No, I think I've said most of them. I mean, I think more people in both of these fields, in art and anthropology, should consider the relationship between the two. In the same way that people will recognize that anthropology and sociology are sisterly, I would argue we should begin to look more towards the arts as anthropologists. There's always the joke of, it's something like it's the most artistic of the social sciences, but the most human of the sciences as a whole. And so I do think that there's this in between that can be worked within. I mean, even if you think about like, what if you did an ethnography on like painting, right? And the way people, maybe there's like groups of people that paint, or I don't know, like these things in here that would be interesting to view of like how these are either cultural expressions or even how they're individual expressions within a larger community. I think all that would be fascinating. I mean, selfish.
That's fair. It's funny. You kind of answered one of the questions, which was, what changes do you wish to see in the anthropology industry? And so getting more into the fine arts, I think, is like a fantastic answer for that.
That'd be fun. I also think I like the multimodality thing. I think the more that Anthro can lean into even stuff like podcasts. I think back to what you said earlier about being able to use the video and the audio as a way of making more public-facing research. And I think, like in particular within my project, that is what it'll do, right? Technically, all the interviews are uploaded on YouTube right now. They're just on a private, they're like unlisted, right? They're there. You just have to have access to them. But long term, once I'm done, I'm just going to make them public, right? And I'll tell people, like, go listen. Like, if you really just go listen to all of them, please. Like, that would be sick. Like, turn it into a podcast. I don't care, right? Like, whatever it is, because I do think that there's something valuable as foreground the people. We have all these things. We have, we talk about like open access research. Yeah, let's do it within journals, but also let's just do it ourselves. Why do we have to be gatekept behind like the academic institution completely? If I make cool research, I can amplify it. It's like if you make cool art, you can make a book yourself. You don't have to have someone publish it for you. I mean, I even think that's true about any types of books. Now, granted, I think it'd be harder to sell an anthro book. That's you self-publish. That seems difficult. Maybe anthro-zine. I would love to see more zines. I will say that. It would be fascinating to see more like short research. I don't mean necessarily short in time, but like not something that's 200 pages. Even the consideration of, can a creative expression be an outlet of a dissertation type research? Which I know a ton of scholars who think the answer is unequivocally yes, there is. And how you navigate that is important, but that's a thing. I would love for interdisciplinarity to be real and not to be like just word of mouth, like, oh, we want to be this. Let's just do it. If anthropology could live, like in a lot of ways, anthropology can be the study of anything. I'm in this fellowship at George Mason University at the Mercatus Center. Basically, it's a libertarian think tank based off policy, politics, and economics. It's basically an economic fellowship, which for me is like, why am I here? Right? Because I don't do any economics. But what was interesting is I went to the fellowship and we're having these group discussions and I kept telling them, I'm like, guys, what you guys are talking about within economics is anthropology. I'm like, well, you guys just don't know it. And I'm like, everything you're talking about is stuff we dealt with already, like that we have tried to repent for, And I think because everyone's so out of touch with each other, they think that they're fighting this unique battle. And it's like, dude, no, just go read other research outside of this, and you'll see that there's a way that you can do exactly what you want to do, just differently. It's like, why do we all have to have esoteric knowledge? Let's have forward knowledge. Like, even with the academic jargon stuff, let's just write plainly. If your interlocutors can't read your research, you did it wrong.
Yeah, it's a tendency that academics write for other academics. They don't write for the general public. And I think they need to write more for the general public than they need to write for other academics, because otherwise, what's the point? No one's learning anything from your research because it's too long and it's too complicated. But a lot of academics, they look down upon individuals who write for the general public because they're like, are you not smart enough for academia? Like, why do you have to dumb it down? Or is that just the way you think?
No, but I think it's funny, though, because I think the counter argument to that would be is like, no, I'm actually intelligent and knowledgeable about my research so well that I can simplify it in a way that's palatable for everybody. I don't have to use these gate-kept words to try to
fancy it up.
Why? Why are you using ameliorate? Like, just use a different word. It's a great word. And look, I've used a bunch of jargon today. I love big words. I think they're fun. But don't make someone Google esoteric. Just don't. Like, I shouldn't say it as much as I do. We're just people. I don't know. It's like an ostrich with their head in the sand.
Now, is there a piece of advice you'd offer to someone who's interested in the fine arts or anthropology?
Yeah, just do something you love. Like, if you have something you really love and you want to research it, just try. Like, you'll be more satisfied. You hear horror stories, and I think this more happens in like the science realm, not so much the social sciences. But also, I've heard this happen sometimes in like psychology. Do research you like. Don't do research that someone else likes. Even if you have faculty that said, nah, I don't want, no, tell them, no, I'm doing it. When I first got to Alaska, what I wanted to do was so Alaska and Louisiana have the first climate refugees of the United States. I don't want to say North America. That might be wrong. But they have the first two groups that are I don't think we technically have climate refugee designation yet, although I think that's being worked on. I know that's being worked on as like a people seeking asylum. Climate will eventually be one of those categories. But so it's the people of the Île-de-Jean Charles. They had been physically moved. They've relocated this whole group of people. Some people stayed, but they built a new community. There was funding for it. And the same thing happened in Alaska and Newtok, Alaska. They completely built a new community because both of these communities were at such risk that they needed to go. But can you force someone to leave when this is who they are? It's not really fair, right? Again, you don't want to eminent domain people. Don't ruin their whole entire... You think about like the interstate system. Like, we just totally ruined whole entire communities. Don't ruin the community. Try to help them. And so originally what I wanted to do was I wanted to go to both communities and try. And then I was like, okay, I don't have money. A complete outsider to Alaska. So it was immediately apparent, okay, that's not going to happen. So I think for a lot of my faculty members, I bet their first thought would have been, well, to do something Alaska related. And I was like, no, I'm still doing it. Louisiana's in this. Y'all are not removing Louisiana. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I do genuinely think that Louisiana and Alaska are much more similar than people think. I mean, even if you look at migratory patterns within certain animals, there are certain animals that quite literally go from New Orleans in the Gulf of Mexico to Fairbanks, Alaska, or to like the Gulf of Alaska. That's where they go. So I think natural resource, oil spills, this reliance on natural resource extraction, these other things, I just call them Arctic rednecks. They get just as drunk as we do. They got big trucks too. It's not all that different. I'm giving you the broad brushstrokes, but it's really not that different.
What do you love about what you do?
I mean, I just love that I can walk around and take photos, or I can go watch music, and that can be research. Like, that's incredible. Like, when you really like think about it, like, that's incredible. Just the fact that I can do anything that I like to do most of the time. Wow. Like, I live in New Orleans to commute to Baton Rouge, right? If I go up for class, I'm driving 3 hours a day to go. It's not the best. Yeah, no, it kind of sucks. But at the end of the day, if that's the price I got to pay, great. I'll pay the price every day. I don't care. Like, me in an office job? No thanks. I'd lose my mind. I think I lost my mind thinking about it already. No, but that's what I love. That's what I love. And I love being able to interact with people. That's fun.
Yeah.
I love learning from people.
I think most anthropologists do. That's why they go into it.
Yeah. If you don't, you're in the wrong field.
Yes. Now, if people wanted to learn more about the fine arts, anthropology, New Orleans, what's the best way they can contact you and learn about what you do?
Okay, well, I got very lucky. I have the same social media name everywhere. My website's the same thing. My name is Miles Jordan, as we've talked about, but my social media and everything else is Miles B. Jordan. But yeah, milesbjordan.com, Instagram.com/Miles B. Jordan. What else? Facebook, I guess. I got a Miles Jordan photography page. At that point, though, just go to Instagram or something else. or go to my website. If you want to reach out to me personally, I do have a milesbjordan@gmail.com email. You could reach out to me there. It's not my primary email though. So if I take a minute to respond, my apologies. Otherwise, outside of me, I think if you want to learn about New Orleans, I think that Andy Horowitz book is fantastic. I think any book by Tulane geographer Richard Campanella is fantastic. He's much more of a human geographer than just a geographer. That's one thing I would also say. This is backtracking a couple questions. But LSU, we're a geography and anthropology department. We're both in the same thing, which is kind of weird. But I think I would like to see that more too. More foregrounding of the geographical components within anthropology. You have to understand geography in a place like New Orleans to understand what it is. And I bet there's a ton of places think about somewhere like Telluride. I mean, my Lord. No, yeah. So any Richard Campanella books I think are fantastic. If you want to see New Orleans photography, Chris Granger, he's been the NOLA.com/Times-Picayune, which is our paper. He's been their photographer, or one of the main photographers the last 30 years. Fine art. I mean, fine art, YouTube's your friend, honestly. And I think also just start from there and go out. Trying to learn the history of art is a process. And I think starting small and expanding is better. I would say if you're really interested in the history of photography or stuff like that, or especially American photographers, go to Instagram and go follow the Gordon Parks Foundation page. Go look at someone like William Eggleston, or goodness, I could rattle off a bunch of names. William Christenberry, or even with stuff like Anthro, go read Mead. I would say if you want, actually, this is one that kind of puts all three together. I got to think about this. If you want something that is kind of fine art, for sure, anthropology, and for sure, New Orleans, the Neighborhood Story Project is a really cool thing to check out. They did a lot of ethnographic work in some of the parts of New Orleans that they eminent domained, including other places as well. But they're these little books, and all of them are a little bit different, right? One of the professors at LSU, Dr. Helen Regis, she was a big part of this. They've also done stuff on some of the more Bayou culture people, not just New Orleans stuff. They've done a bunch of cool stuff. I would also say if you want some really raw, last 30 years of underbelly New Orleans photography, search Polo Silk. I'm not gonna lie to you though, if you follow him on Instagram, he posts a lot. A lot. So keep that in mind. And some of the stuff is really raw. And he was one of the major Cash Money, Young Money. He grew up with Baby and Slim, the guys who started Cash Money. So he had proximity. But Polo's cool, man. He wears all polo. He shoots mostly Polaroids. Dude's cool as hell. Just awesome. Regular guy.
Well, this has been an absolute fun and enjoyable conversation. I don't think I've laughed that much or that hard during an interview so far, and I've been doing this over a year. So it's definitely been the most entertaining episode so far, which is fantastic.
Hey, I know I rambled at times and I kind of went all over the place. I tried to, at the beginning, I was like, I'm going to do this really professionally and then I just became myself. So to be honest, this is me in all of my glory. This is how I am with my friends, the way I joke, the way I talk, the whole thing. Try to be someone other than myself sometimes. I don't think it's possible. I was going to say though, thank you. That's actually really kind. And I'm glad that I didn't expect to be the most entertaining, but hey, I'll take that as a win.
Yeah, it was a great time. It was great learning about how you've connected the fine arts, photography, anthropology, and, the research that you're doing in New Orleans. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was a blast. It was a pleasure. And if you ever, once you finish your PhD program and you find out the answer to your very general question, I'd love to have you back on and we can talk about it more.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll do it. This was fun. Thank you so much again. And I think this whole, your idea, I think the whole platform, I think this is awesome. And kind of like I said earlier, I think this is valuable in Anthro and we probably should do it more. Shout out to you. That's what I'm saying. Thank you again.
Of course. All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of AnthroPuzzled. This show was produced by me and distributed in collaboration with the American Anthropological Association. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website, L. Akers for the incredible logo design, and to AnthroPuzzled's intern, Fiona, for the episode descriptions. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound and Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letzinger@anthropuzzled.com or as AnthroPuzzled on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time,